Hi, it's Musolini, the Merchant of Success. Welcome to the Art of Effective Meetings 2.0. And in this segment, it's very important for us to focus on this subject because somehow, somewhere, we've all been engaged in meetings from childhood to where we are at now. And therefore, in one way or the other, you spend a big portion of your time as we'll be looking at the numbers in meetings. Therefore, you need to figure out how to be effective in these meetings, because if you do, you'll save time, energy, and money. And if you don't, you'll waste more time, energy, and money. And this is the framework I follow when I'm teaching. It's clarity, mindset, strategy, skill set, and mastery. I believe everything else is clear apart from clarity. For clarity, in my personal context, it's about the what and why. What is it and why is it crucial, all right? And then, of course, the mindset is about the sort of thought process we need in between. Now, let's start with clarity. So clarity on effective meetings. So what are effective meetings? When we say effective meetings, in this case, it is you having achieved the intended outcome, then we can confidently say that you were effective. So if you set a goal or an objective and you realize that, then it's the ultimate test of what effectiveness is all about. So to unpack this notion of an effective meeting is that there is an intended outcome, and then the right participants are in attendance. And I should also add actively. Please underline that word actively. You see, sometimes there are meetings, people are there, they sign, but the question is, were they in the meeting or they just signed for their presence? So actively means people are engaged mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, intellectually, they're engaged. So for me, that's a key word for us to pay attention to. And that also means, as a side note, if you are the one chairing the meeting, how can you get the participants or meeting participants to be actively engaged, to be fully engaged mentally, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually? Because if you don't, then we cannot qualify that as having been effective. Also, the least time possible. If the least time possible is spent, then the better. I'll tell you, I was amazed. This image really stuck in my brain. I got an opportunity, lucky me indeed, shortly after university. Someone recommended me and I went for an internship in Washington, D.C. It was an organization called Family Research Council. And we used to meet every morning. And there was this guy who was heading the department I was interning in. He was a retired colonel. This guy was incredible. Our meetings, 5 minutes max. So he was like, all right, so Darren, you are supposed to work on this and this. How is that? What's the status? All right, so and so you are supposed to go to meet Congressman so John, how far is that? But 5 minutes and boom, we are in, we are out, and all the meetings we were standing. I was amazed. So it's really not about time, the amount of time spent. It's about how efficient and effective that you are. Also, if the agenda is followed strictly, that's also another quality to pay attention to. And there is follow-up on the actions. So meaning there is a mechanism like that retired colonel I've told you about. Such a tall, imposing guy. Just need to remember his name. It was amazing. It was an amazing lesson in action. So for him, he always had his diary, always, noted things. He knew how to follow things up, right? Now, why is it important to manage meetings effectively? I gave you a bigger frame earlier, but let's go a little deeper. You see, effective meetings lead to increased engagement and collaboration. So meaning if meetings are great, then the engagement is higher, people are able to collaborate further, and that is always a fantastic experience to be in, to be amidst. Because in life, it's really about when you're engaging with people, the question is, Are you engaging? Are you fully engaged to the max? Do you get people to collaborate on things such that even when you are not around, they continue the game. They continue engaging further and higher, because if there is no serious engagement, then it could be that how you were behaving in the moment or in the meeting was not as efficient or as effective as it could have been, all right? Now, let's continue. Effective meetings also build strong teams, and they're a great place for accountability, and they yield results. So if you have a system in place, it's always a great place to engage, to get accountability. And also when we say build strong teams, because if there are updates and of course people are engaged and they are sharing their thoughts and ideas, that alone increases the bond. The challenge comes in when people are not speaking and they are in cocoons and they are quiet in meetings, and then they speak up in corridors. That doesn't necessarily build strong teams per se, but I would say is, what I said is, or what I would like to communicate is, if there is solid engagement and people are really sharing what they think, what they feel, and their goals, what they are working on, that automatically increases the bond in the team, and of course the results go higher. They save time and money, that one I talked about earlier, so I want to go further. And you're also able to make quality decisions quicker. You see, when you get into a meeting and people are giving low quality information, or there isn't a proper system for people to really speak what matters, then you cannot make a decision. I recall some time back, I was coaching one of my staff members who I asked for some information. And in my view, it was really not a fully baked package. And I said, look, in future, when someone asks you for this kind of information, you need to give 1, 2, 3, 4 things so they can make a quick decision to know whether they can make an intelligent decision. And an intelligent decision means it's either a yes or a no, and it is spot on. So if meetings are effective, then, and people are providing that quality information, you can make those quality decisions and in a quicker manner, all right? It's also important to note some of these numbers, that 37% of employees believe that their organization's most significant cost is unnecessary meetings. Oh, yeah. There is an organization I got to know about, and it's in the private sector. They meet once a week, and they meet the whole day, literally, up to like from morning up to 4. And I'm like, huh, what's that? So that's a lot of time. The other numbers to note is that 11 million meetings are held each day, which means that 55 million meetings are held per week, and therefore 220 million meetings are held per year. Think about that globally. 15% of an organization's time is spent in meetings, which has increased every year since 2008. So meaning, think about it. Think about that, 15% of the organization's time. So meaning for every 100 minutes, 15 minutes go to meetings. And the challenge, of course, is most of those meetings are not effective, and some of them are blunt out, not necessary. Okay. The good news is we'll figure out how to cut out part of this wastage. All right. Yeah, I like what Godfrey Kalunja said here, that I believe meetings also help our stakeholders on the decisions they were part of. Absolutely. So when you engage people, then, and they are part of the conversations and they are fully engaged, they own. And when you have ownership, you move forward with less friction and more conviction along the way. Cool. So the second segment is mindset. So there are 3 important mindsets needed for a successful meeting. The first mindset is less is more. less participants, less meeting objectives, less agenda items, less action points, the more the meeting yields. Just to give you a hint, say, for example, on action points, when we had just started out facilitating and training people, we would go, okay, so when you go back to work, what are you going to do differently? And people would generate like dozens of things, sometimes as many as 20 action points. And in my mind, I was like, yeah, they are committing more. Yeah. Wapi. By the time you check the following meeting, you discover they have literally done almost nothing. So now at Success Africa, we are very adamant. We typically limit action points to like a maximum of 3 maximum. Why? Because we discovered that less is more. If people commit to so many things, it's hard to juggle, they get confused and they get overwhelmed. And when people are in a state of overwhelm, then they cannot move forward. And yet, what meetings should be for is that people are able to move forward with more confidence and certainty and proper direction. Also, when I say few participants, it's not that every meeting everyone has to be part of something, because that I've also discovered that doesn't help. And when you think about the agenda also, if you have an agenda of, say, 12 things, how on earth are you going to accomplish that? That's how sometimes meetings end up being so long. Talking about the agenda, here's something else that me as Ethan Musolini, I'm totally against. Okay, now you may be for it, but I'll speak up anyhow. This business of having something on the agenda called A or B, any other business. I don't know who came up with that idea. What on earth is any other business? I could as well start talking about how I enjoyed a good night, I enjoyed playing with my daughters last night, and then another one talks about a soccer match, and then before you know it, any other business takes in more time than the original items. So in my view, if it's useful, it gets on the agenda. If it's not on the agenda, zero. No, you get away from that. So the moment you entertain this concept or this idea of any other business, be very careful. So personally, I'm totally against that. I don't believe in it. I believe at the beginning of the meeting, it's okay for you to double check if there is something else the team feels is very crucial to add on to the agenda. And if it's not there, then it's not there, okay? Then the other mindset is out of necessity meetings, meaning, is the meeting necessary? Is it necessary to have all these people together? Is it necessary to hold it at that particular time? So in other words, that's the necessity test. Oh, we need to have a meeting about this. Really, do we need to? Oh, let's have a general staff meeting. Do we need that, or we just need a few representatives from the team? And of course, there are moments where you need everyone together to engage. That's okay. Please don't quote me wrongly here. I'm saying do it with the people who are absolutely necessary, because then sometime when we talk about productivity and company time being stolen, not stolen, but wasted, you might find that a meeting which is being attended by 10 people, that meeting, the job could be done by 3 people. Meaning, if the meeting is 1 hour, you see, here is the dynamic that we need to be aware of. If you are having a meeting for 1 hour, usually we think, oh, it's just 1 hour. If it's 10 people in the meeting, that's 10 productive company hours. So if each hour is worth, let's say, $100, that is $1,000 that we are taking out of the company's pocket. Therefore, if that meeting of 10 people can be done by 3 people, then you've saved the company 700 hours. I mean $700. 7 hours, which is equal to $700 being put back into the company's pocket. Okay. So that's, and is it necessary to hold it at that particular time? Because the other thing that we also have to be very aware of is meetings being held in the most productive hours. You have to be very cautious of that also. Having said that, I also am aware that there are those crucial items which need to be engaged, or where people need to engage when their brains are really fresh, say very early in the morning. Because I will tell you, at Success Africa, we used to hold meetings, the weekly meetings, first thing in the morning. We changed that policy to, I believe before lockdown, it was either 10 or 11 or something like that. Because we felt, look, it can't be that when people are super fresh, then just in the meeting, they should focus on the projects that matter most. Then having said that, there are those moments, for example, I remember when we were discussing the current strategic plan that we are running with, we realized that there are some items which needed us to be super fresh, and therefore it was okay to start with that in the morning. So again, it's about context. I'm also saying you also have to be aware of the particular time you're holding the meeting. Does it have to be at that particular moment? Because in my view, if the items on the agenda do not require a lot of brain power, then you can schedule them towards later in the afternoon, as an example, or towards the end of day, as an example. Again, of course, if your context allows, because you might find that what I'm proposing in your context may not allow. All I'm saying is focus-led productive activities take center stage, and let meetings be secondary unless otherwise. Because like I mentioned, there are those moments whereby you have to schedule them, for example, first thing in the morning. The other mindset which is important is outcome-oriented mindset. Focus on achievement. What would make this particular meeting a success? So it could be, for example, you say, what would make this particular meeting a success is us agreeing on the budget, and it is signed for. Boom, done. That's therefore everything else is driven to that end. Anything outside, you run away from it. All right? Cool. Let's switch to strategies. Here is the 3-step strategy for effective meeting management. And I'll do it in step format. One is the plot. And here is where we talk about the preparatory stage of meetings. So you need to plot the right way. So how do you implement this plotting strategy or step or stage? Number one, you establish the why objective. What do we want to get out of this meeting? And why is this meeting important? Say, we want to agree on a budget such that we can kickstart this project. Then you need to come up with a clear agenda or content of the meeting. So meaning, okay, we will have remarks from the head to project, to communicate the vision of this project. Then we will have different department heads present, their budgets. Then we, next step could be to get agree, and then the finance director to approve or whatever. I'm just creating everything from scratch, but you come up with a clear agenda. Next is you assign roles ahead of time. You'll be amazed. I've been invited to speak at events where, or to facilitate, and in between people are supposed to present, and someone say, oh, but I thought you were supposed to present. No, you were the one. No, and now it becomes an argument. Instead of a meeting, it becomes a war of words and counter accusations and blame. So you need to assign roles ahead of time and communicate those roles ahead of time, indeed, because also that means if, for example, you send the agenda, people's names are there, okay, rather than just having it, just an item. Next is provide logistical requirements. I've heard of stories, someone is supposed to appear at a certain meeting and then he says, no, but You promised transport and I'm stuck and I don't have transport here. No one said to me, oh, but you could have come and then would have refunded. Doesn't work that way. So if you're a leader, for example, ask yourself, have we provided the logistical requirements, whether it's transport, whether it's the room and is the projector there and all that. So if you have someone doing that, it's helpful. That's why, like for some big corporates who have big budgets, you find sometimes they engage an events manager to make sure that all those details are laid out to make sure that things are done. So what I've found useful, again, one of the organizations I engaged with closely that was very efficient is British Council. Like they have a checklist. I mean, they have a detailed checklist of events. It's amazing. And that's why, even though they're a small team, they really do amazing. They are really a small team when you hear it, and yet they're super, super efficient. And part of that is they really know how to plan for things. When it comes to plotting, they are really excellent at plotting for things. Two is the action. Then you need to think through about what transpires during the meeting. So how do you implement this? Number one is stick to the agenda. Now, the question is, but we usually get off the agenda. So one of the strategies is if it's, say, a stakeholders engagement and there are people of different egos and all that, then you need someone who is not only diplomatic, but also firm. There are those characters. One of the guys I really like, he's called Henry Rugamba. We are in the same Rotary Club. He's a master communicator, but what I love about him is he'll bump you off stage with a smile on his face. So meaning he's elegant and tactful in his languaging, and yet he's also firm. So you need someone, whether they are the ones chairing or they are the MC or whatever it is, you need those characters who embody those qualities. Because you also don't want someone who is very rude. I mean, I've seen people who just switch off the mic or just grab it. That's being rude. You're firm, but rude at the same time. So you need to find a way to stick to the agenda. And if you're the one chairing, also embody those qualities. And if you don't know how, find a way to master those qualities. And if symptoms persist, seek Ethan Musolini's advice. All right. Number two, ask for solutions or proposals from team members. Now, what do I mean? Usually you find meetings become a dung heap of problem statements. Oh, yeah, but there is also this problem. Yeah, there is also this challenge. Yeah, but we also have this problem. Like, what is the solution? No, but you are management. You also have to think of solutions. For us, we know this thing has been a problem for the last 5 years or the last 5 months. I'm like, nope. What is the solution? So please let's mute. So the key thing is, as a rule of thumb, always, if you really want your meeting to be effective, spend as much time as possible on solutions, not problem statements. Once the problem or the challenge is clear, jump. Because the issue I've noticed, there are some individuals who just want to make a statement to record their presence. So the problem has been well stated, and then say, yeah, I really want to add something to that. You see, just like John has said, okay, if John has said it, why are you saying it? Do you have a solution? So that also means, now that's where the firmness and being tactical comes in. So, okay, all right. So since we've already had that, can you please propose a solution? Yeah, but I want to say, yeah, we've had, let's move to the solutions, because ultimately we need to move forward. Okay. Stick to results, not stories. This I love. So I learned this concept of story many years ago when I was doing an internship in New York, and there's this guy said, you either did something or there is a story. You either did it or it's a story. And the story, they meant excuse. And so it is something that I've been pushing for, in that most times when it's meetings, it's not, usually meetings, what we call meetings, are really not meetings. They are storytelling events. I like the sound of that. They're just storytelling events. They are excuse creating events. Oh, you see, I would have, but let me tell you what actually happened. You know, there was traffic. Then when I jumped on the border, even the border got stuck. Even when it got stuck, then the traffic man headed. Then I started walking. Then when I walked, then I noticed the thing fell in the water. And then, and I'm like, hello. And then that person comes late, of course. I'm like, you've kept us late. You've not produced the results. You're spending more time of our meetings, our meeting time, giving us stories. How many of you understand what I'm talking about? Meaning, people are not reporting results, but stories stroke excuses. If you've experienced that more often, how many of you have experienced more excuses, people reporting more excuses than results most times in your life? Please type the word yes if that makes sense. Or if that, at least that's been my experience in, of course, I no longer, I do not entertain that in my team. Now they know. But before then, that's what I used to see. I've noticed so many yeses, excuses. So one of the things one of the gifts you can bring to your team, if you're a team leader, for example, or a business owner, or head of the team, or whatever it is, and even if you're not the team leader, you can influence and say, may I propose that moving forward, we focus on people reporting results and not excuses. And if you can't say it in front of everyone, you can talk to your team leader privately, because I believe at whatever level you are at, even if you don't have control, you can influence. Okay. Now, what do I mean results, not stories? What I mean by that, you either did it or you didn't. If you didn't do it, say, no one, I apologize, I didn't do it, and I promise by Wednesday, at this time, it will be delivered. You see, don't tell us about the stories of why you didn't do it and of course, unless you are asked. But the challenge is I see a lot of this. And once you adopt that culture, then people will stop giving those stories. Next is minutes ideally should be taken in form of way forward and action planning. What do I mean by that? See, oftentimes when you read people's minutes, it's again narrative. Now you need two documents. A document which shows action point and planning, action point and who is to do that, a summary of that, and the narrative as a supporting document. But if all the minutes are recorded in form of narratives, then number one, it wastes time when people are reviewing those minutes. And because then ultimately, in my view, again, depending on the context, there are contexts where you may need all the narratives. But then if you have that page which shows, agreed item, agreed upon action, and by who and when, then when you come for the following meeting, the chair can say, okay, Joanne, you are supposed to, secure the hall for the meeting. What's the status on that? So either John has secured or hasn't. But when you go into reading and then the meeting discovered that actually what will be needed is for the whole meeting to be held outside the workplace, and therefore it was resolved that there would be a meeting place and Joanne was supposed to be the one to da-da-da-da. Are you following what I'm talking about here? So thereby us, and yet that is such a simple item that if someone just looked at that page of action point and the way forward, can just ask John. We don't need a narrative around that. Then, assuming there is an action point and and someone, people have forgotten what the narrative is all about, then you can revisit the narrative. So I find that form of minute taking to be much more efficient. Next is ensure people perform their roles. Is there someone to manage time? Is there someone to take minutes? Is there someone to chair? So your job is to make sure that people deliver on what their roles are. All right, let's continue. Then the third item to that then is reviewing and evaluating. Number one, what was the purpose of the meeting? Number two, what was the purpose met and to what extent? So I like that portion of to what extent. Fully, somewhat, or not at all. And if, for example, that doesn't work, I also like, I usually like doing numbers on a scale of 0 to 10, where the 10, it was the purpose was totally met, and 0, nothing was achieved. How would you rate that? How do you rate it? Then some people say 10, or they might say 8. Then you could say, okay, what would make it a 10 next time? Or what do we need to do to make sure that that purpose is raised to a level 10? Then people will give you some specifics on how to make sure either next time you improve, or you do, or something that you can improve right away. Were planned decisions made as required and expected? So these are questions that help you to review and evaluate the effectiveness of your meeting. Okay. Next, if decisions were not made as expected, why not? How come? Or if the purpose was not met, how come? So that we get the lessons. And again, the why not is, or how come. I actually prefer the word how come rather than why not, because why not is, the why always sounds like the language of their chooser. So when you ask these questions, then there should be for learning purposes that in future we can do better. Okay, that should be the goal. Cool. All right, so we'll call it the Ethan Musolini meeting management model. P.P.P.R.D.T.S, right? So meaning you need to master these to make sure that the other 3 strategies make sense. Number 1, priorities. What absolutely must be covered? So meaning you need to think, you need to develop the art of prioritization. You have to come from that place and space of what must be done or covered as a rule of thumb. Number 2, participants. Who needs to attend the meeting for it to be successful? These are the questions you ask yourself. It's not just about let's get people into the meeting. No. Who would contribute to this conversation to make sure that we have the highest quality decisions? It's not the number of people, it's also the quality of their engagement and contribution. You see, also there are those moments whereby when you need to make a decision, you want people to, you want correct information from the team. And so one of the things you need to look out for is twofold. Number 1, level of engagement and confidence. Are those people you're bringing on board confident enough to speak up? That's 1. Quality number 2 is the quality of their thought process. Because there are people who are confident, they speak out, but my God, when they open their mouth, you're like, oh, ooh, ah, ooh, oh, ooh. Did he say that? Did she say that? So quality. And there are also people who are very thorough in thought process, and yet they never speak out in meetings. You hear them in the corridors. So those are people you may, by the way, actually consult one-on-one and bring those thoughts in the room and say one of the staff members I was speaking to said this, and I thought it was very useful. And by the talking about which, if you're a manager, if a staff member gives you an idea or contributes an innovative idea, whatever it is, if it is safe to mention their name, please do. Because one of the things that really hurt people that I've heard from other staff members say, oh, I had this idea and my manager stepped up and he spoke as if it was his. not cool at all. So again, the participants who needs to meet for it to be successful. And of course, there are other considerations, whether it's regions or departments and all that. But I'm saying if you have powers and you need these ad hoc meetings, which can help you move things faster, those are some of the two qualities I would look at, first of all. The other third one would be big thinking, not just the quality of thought, but someone who is vision, who thinks strategic at that level. Next is place. Where will the meeting take place? And when we say where will it take place, if you're a decision maker, there are some things I highly recommend that you look at the money spent as not a cost, but actually an investment. This is what I mean. There are some smart organizations I've dealt with whereby if, for example, they are going to work on a proposal, fine-tune a proposal for funding, they go to a hotel, a quiet place, a nice place where they know that people will be fully focused, no distractions. And then they have spent money that they have not spent, they have invested. Because if this proposal goes through and they get $1 million, so what is $10,000 spent on how many nights, whatever it is, for people to really edit this proposal, whatever. But when you put it in the boardroom and people keep saying, can I have you for a minute? And then they are bringing papers to sign it. Then at the end of the day, something which would have taken 2 days ends up taking a full week. So because of constant interruptions and all that. So place the point, and of course I have to acknowledge sometimes you may not have the budget, but I'm saying sometimes when you have the budget, if it is something crucial, usually it helps when you take it outside. How is the results? What do you need to accomplish at the meeting? So you need that super clarity in your brain. And then the D is date and time. When will the meeting take place? So this, you could call it, so what I'm giving is like a checklist for you to be fully aware of, because if you don't, then this meeting will not be a success. Timing, how much time will we spend on each topic? Now, this piece of timing may look like a small thing, but you'll be amazed how people apportion items, and they say, okay, between this time and this time, people will be making presentations, so it should take about 2 hours, and they put a block of 10 hours. No, it doesn't work that way, my friend. If you know that then you know that so and so, their time is 15 minutes, that's it. Or it's 20 minutes, that's it. Between this time and this time, Ethan is speaking for 20 minutes. Here is another clue for you that I've seen happen. If it's 20 minutes, for example, then the next item, just know this, we do not budget for switching time, because someone then has to unplug, whatever it is, then has to move. And then by the time you start and someone settles in, and then you who's coming next, at the end of the day, it's not 20 minutes, it ends up being, say, 15 minutes or 17 minutes. So when you're budgeting for time, also budget for switching time between presentations. Because usually when people are budgeting, you notice that it's back to back from 8 to 8:30, then 8:30 to 9. No, then you could do 8 to 8:25, then 8:30 to 8:55, something like that, then 9, like that. So switching time. Next, sequence. In what order will you cover the topics? Now, of course, when we say sequence, you need to think through the sequence that would make sense to say, okay, if we start with this item, then following the next logical item should be this, because sometimes people jumble up things and then you're thinking, yeah, I wish if we had known this information early in the morning, then we wouldn't have made this decision. So you need to think in a logical manner to say, okay, if we need to make quality decisions, or if we are to get quality outputs from this meeting, in what order and timing should this be? And also when you talk about timing, if I may go back to timing again, also not all presentations are created equal. So it's okay to give some people more time than others, because sometimes someone says, but someone is having this. Yeah, depending on your wisdom, you might find that a certain segment requires more attention, or it might attract many more questions, might require, it is contentious, or people usually have questions around that topic. If we are to go by historical data, then you budget for more time for that particular segment. All right. Cool. Here we go. Mastery. So for me, here is where we go. Now, number one is think of a scenario where you can apply this checklist. And the other way to think about it is if you have a meeting coming up, so how are you going to use this checklist that I've given you, or these checklists that I've given you from Strategy Skills? So here, that is the checklist. What's the meeting goal or objective? And by the way, have you noticed in most meetings, I don't know about it, but in most meetings, people start from agenda, but the meeting goal stroke objective is usually not as clear. And yet the agenda should be driven, or I mean, derived from the meeting goal stroke objective. The attendees, the time, the venue, the technology required, the roles, the logistical requirements. So this should be the checklist that you have to run through your brain or on your list to make sure that all is well and fine. All right? Cool. The other thing that I would like you to write down is next time you're attending a meeting or chairing a meeting, ask yourself these questions. What are they doing well in this meeting? What could they do differently? Start to become like an investigator. If you're the one chairing the meeting, at the end of the meeting, evaluate yourself. What did I do well? What could I have done differently based on what Ethan Musolini taught me? Okay, so that you become a constant, never-ending student. Then lastly, ask yourself, how can I make my next meetings more efficient and effective? If the meeting has been taking 30 minutes, can we make it in 25 minutes? Because I recall one of us here gave her some of these tips, and they were able to run the meeting, I believe, for the first time, finish the meeting on time. All right, for the first time, I think after decades or so. So this stuff works if you apply it. That's my guarantee. This stuff works. And talking about which, So this is Justine. Justine heads the MasterCard Foundation program at Makerere University. She has a PhD. She's a lecturer in School of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences. She says, I confirm that after watching one of the CDs bought from you in December 2019, I immediately started to act accordingly, and I confess that my meetings are much more efficient than ever before. Of course, I had to first orient my team as well to these strategies. So there you go. And so this is Justine confirming, and I will tell you that this stuff works indeed. So if you apply it, all right, cool. So once you go to the breakout rooms, this is what I want you to discuss. What did you find most useful in this presentation, and how are you going to implement the lessons moving forward in your life and career stroke business? So when you move forward, so what are you going to do differently? All right. All right. So Claire is asking, how does one deal with a boss who digresses from the agenda and meetings and never ends on time? So the way I would handle that, Susan, is next time your team leader is alone, because this is something you may not raise in front of everyone, because then you don't know how much ego this person has, is you put them aside, not put them aside, can ask, say, excuse me, could I have 5 minutes of your time? Once they say yes, you go meet them and say, by the way, start with a question. Say, I'm curious, I noticed that sometimes we usually digress from the meeting agenda, and usually we never end on time. May I know what typically causes that? Then they will tell you. So what you're doing is you're seeking understanding first. Then secondly, once you've understood how it works, then you could say, I believe it would also be very useful if we start the agenda and also finished on time, because it would help us finish some of the tasks of the day, because sometimes it's difficult to leave a meeting. It may look rude, and sometimes we have urgent things to accomplish. And I also believe some of the meetings that say take 2 hours could be done in 1.5 hours, and that 30 minutes a day really means a lot for us to accomplish this. And you say you could, and if you have specific feedback, you could give him or her examples and say, for example, I noticed we raised this other item, which I believe could have been deferred or could have been assigned to the head of department to discuss that, or it could be given as a task. So what I mean by that is, and then you show the advantages of that. Say, and the advantage to that is this person will feel more empowered, and at the same time as a company would save time. And then you can also use me as an excuse and say, you know, I attended this meeting. Actually, this would be a perfect excuse. See, I attended this other training on how to run effective meetings by Ethan Musolini. And one of the things he advised was, look, we need to stick to agendas and keep time, because then the company is able to save time. For example, he said, whereas companies think that it's just a 1-hour meeting, but the reality is if you are 20 people in a meeting, that's 20 hours of company time wasted. So, spent. So if you're able to cut that 1 hour to 30 minutes, then you've actually not saved 30 minutes, you've actually saved 10 hours of company time. And I was like, wow, that would be very useful for us as an organization, would earn that productive time back, then would achieve more of our goals. Susan, I really feel that trick would be the easiest one for you to communicate. Now, notice what I'm doing there, the psychology. The psychology is, it's not you speaking, it is you're just borrowing, or you're just verbalizing what you learned. Number one, you're showing that you're keen to learn. Number two, you're just forwarding the idea. Then number two, for a leader, for a boss, they understand the issue of productivity, because most people do not understand. At least I've not had people, I've ever had only one person in my life use this scenario, and most people do not have that understanding of, it's not 1 hour, it's 20 hours of company time. So if you package it and you you communicate like you care about the full company, they will get the idea. Claire, please, you're welcome to type in the chat box if that makes sense. Justin says, how do you manage a member of the meeting, often much older than many, who wants to substantiate every point submitted? Cool, that's a great point. So what I would do, again, depending on the context and personality, if it is someone senior, again, I would adopt the strategy I've shared with Claire, whereby you put them aside and say, look, the other thing, I noticed that every point you raised, you always want to substantiate on everything. May I know what influences you to think that way? And then they will give you their reasons. And then you could follow it up and say, yeah, and one of the things I learned recently in a training I was attending was that in meetings, it's not only about you sharing, it's also about listening. Because when you listen, you're giving people a gift of your attention. And that's one. And two, you also create space for others. So you may consider creating a balance in between sharing and also listening, because it also creates space for others. It also creates space for you to listen to other ideas. And again, one-on-one, please, one-on-one. These things work best when it's one-on-one, not in public. All right, Prisa says, I'm going to invest more in planning the meeting objective and assigning relevant speakers and timing. Great. Jojo is asking, when you notice halfway that the meeting timelines are getting out of hand, how do you bring it back? Well, Jojo, that's a great question. And there are two ways. I will give you one practical solution, and then the other one would be, a pragmatic one. Now, if you notice that timelines are getting out of hand, how do you bring it back? Number one, I would communicate and say, excuse me, members, I would like to bring this back. I really like the intensity of the conversation. I like the value. So you first acknowledge the good in terms of what's happening. Can see how this has happened, has brought up these other Oops, sorry about that. So you can talk about how this has brought up so many segments that were useful because of ABCD. So they see that you are acknowledging and appreciating. And at the same time, I would like to remind us that our agenda, we really have 3 items to go, and we only have 20 minutes to go. So I'm proposing that number 1, that we go faster, okay? That could be practical option number 1. Number 2, you say, okay, for us who are supposed to have 10 minutes, you have to find a way to compress it in 5 minutes. Then option 2, the other pragmatic one, depending on the context and situation, you could request, I know we're supposed to finish by 1 o'clock. May I request that you give us an extra 15 minutes? Because you don't want to assume that, because if it was supposed to be done by 1, so this then they notice that it's already time, then people start looking at their watches, and now you've lost them. And then number 3, if you're the chair, it's also okay for you to, this is tip number 3. If you're the chair and you have the authority, you can move in and say, you know what, all right, so I'm inviting us to go back to this because I can see we are losing time and we need to finish this by 1 o'clock. And you can put a bit of pressure on people. So the key thing is be diplomatic and yet firm at the same time, and give reasons why it's important. And Jojo, you can go ahead and let me know at the end whether this makes sense or not. Juliet is asking, how do you deal with BS team members? Forgive my French. They take up so much time talking about nothing. So Juliet, what you can do is in that moment, you can say, okay, could you please tell us your point exactly? Or someone say, oh, could you please tell us what the question is exactly? You could also, could you please summarize such that we finish this? And sometimes you can even say, okay, please, 10 seconds to go. And then there are those other characters say, hey, but I have a point. Say, yeah, and there are other people who also need to speak. So please, right? So you can be very forthright. Sometimes such characters, they understand that language, and you can also put them aside depending on the context. Godfrey, how do you handle senior colleagues who never prepare for meetings and start creating submissions while in there and have no written submissions even when required? So in that moment, again, who never prepare, Godfrey, I believe I've answered that question in the feedback segment. Say, again, ask, I notice you almost never prepare. May I know the reasons why? For me, I am a senior fellow, and say, yeah, and the thing is, would really appreciate it next time if you prepare, because it keeps things in order, and then it's productive and you look more organized. Because I noticed last quarter, when you were presenting, you were really organized, you had everything prepared, and you spent less time. You spent 10 minutes, yet I've noticed when you don't, you spend 30 minutes. So you give them feedback one-on-one. Claire, Susan Claire says, yeah, good. Says, thanks, great tips, we'll try them out. Susan, I always advise my clients and my listeners never to use the word try. You know, do it, do not try. I like that quote, that do or do not, there is no try, okay? Justin says, I shall use the approach, what I've recently learned in training, and I also try hard to practice this. Okay, no trying, you will practice that. Jojo says, very good tips. Julia says, thanks, Ethan. We'll try that. Yeah, of course, by now you know my stand on trying. You do it. You do not try. All right. Great. So